The Young and the Restless recap for Monday, March 16th reveals that Diane Jenkins Abbott will make a bold move after she realizes Jack Abbott, Peter Bergman, betrayed her. Victor Newman will also lash out at Nikki Newman as their own marriage takes another hit. On the yacht, Jack will try to pump the brakes with Patty Williams, but she'll quickly get him kissing again. Once Jack finishes stripping down, he'll do the deed with Patty and regret it afterward, as whatever he was drugged with starts wearing off. Of course, Patty will be on cloud 9 and will think they both felt how magical that was. Diane will eventually barge in after the boat brings her to the yacht along with Billy Abbott and Kyle Abbott. Once Diane finds Jack in bed with Patty, she'll be absolutely horrified. Billy and Kyle will come along as well, so Patty will pipe up about this being a party with all the Abbott men. Billy will mostly seem caught off guard, but Kyle will be angry like Diane and will want some answers. Jack won't really know what happened, but he'll realize he needs to speak with Diane and try to explain. Diane will express her disgust with both Patty and Jack before insisting she'll be one doing the talking. Once Diane is alone with a now dressed Jack, she'll slap him hard across the face and fume over his betrayal. Meanwhile, Nikki will head to the Abbott mansion where she'll fill Tracy Abbott, Beth Maitland in on Victor, having Jack abducted and held in a yacht on Lake Michigan with another woman. Tracy will have questions about Victor's seduction scheme, but she won't think Jack would ever betray Diane. After Billy calls to let Tracy know Jack's been found and is okay, Tracy will pass that news along to Nikki. At the Newman Ranch, Victor will question if it's a good idea for Adam Newman to accompany Nick Newman on his Vegas mission considering his past, but Adam will be determined to help his brother. Victor will also wonder if Nick wants a security team to take over with Matt Clark once he's located, but Nick will insist on being the one to end this nightmare. When Victoria Newman pops up, she'll mention her Milan trip as well as Victor's decision to kidnap Jack. Adam will admit he already knew, but this will be the first time Nick's hearing about his father's extreme move. Although Nick will have plenty of complaints, Victoria will be more understanding of Victor's actions and will defend her plan to recruit Summer Newman against Phyllis too. Nikki will eventually come home and gloat about Jack being found since she heard about it from Tracy. Once Victor confirms that over the phone, he'll reconvene with Nikki privately and insist he doesn't want to talk about it. Nikki won't be sure she can forgive Victor for what he did to Jack, but Victor will wonder if she really thinks he cares and will order her to get out. At Crimson Lights, Sharon Newman will tell Chelsea Lawson that Adam is stronger now and that he'll have Nick to help him if Vegas issues arise. There'll also be some talk about Connor Newman and Mariah Copeland as Chelsea bonds with Sharon on Monday's YNR episode. Chelsea will eventually head home, where Adam will meet up with her to say goodbye ahead of his trip. After Chelsea pushes Adam to promise he'll check in and avoid letting his past get under his skin, Adam will offer plenty of reassurance. Nick will give Sharon some reassurance as well once they meet up at the coffee house. Despite Sharon's fears about how all the Matt drama will play out, Nick will remain committed to stopping their enemy for good. The Young and the Restless spoilers say Adam and Nick's time in Las Vegas will come with some shockers, so stay tuned. The air inside the yacht cabin felt impossibly heavy after Diane's slap echoed through the room, the sharp sound hanging between her and Jack like a crack in glass that could never truly be repaired. And Jack stood frozen, his cheek burning while the confusion in his mind slowly cleared as whatever haze had clouded his judgment began to fade, leaving him with the dreadful realization that the situation looked exactly like the betrayal Diane believed it to be. Diane's eyes were blazing with a mixture of rage, humiliation, and heartbreak as she paced across the small cabin, her voice trembling despite her attempt to remain composed while she demanded that Jack explain how he could destroy their marriage in such a humiliating way, yet Jack could barely form words. Struggling to piece together flashes of memory that felt fragmented and wrong, recalling Patty's sudden appearance, the strange drink she had insisted he try, the way the room had begun to spin before his judgment, vanished under a fog he could not explain, and though he tried to tell Diane that something wasn't right, that he would never willingly betray her like that, Diane's expression hardened as she folded her arms and declared that she had heard excuses before in her life, and she refused to listen to another one. Now, outside the cabin door, Billy leaned against the railing of the yacht, running a hand through his hair as he muttered that this entire situation was insane, even by Abbott family standards, while Kyle paced furiously nearby, his jaw clenched and his mind racing with the image he had just seen inside, the one he desperately wished he could erase, because seeing his father in that position with Patty Williams was something he never imagined witnessing, and the thought that Victor Newman might somehow be connected to this disaster began creeping into Kyle's mind as the pieces of the puzzle started forming a troubling pattern. Patty herself, however, remained strangely cheerful, lounging comfortably in a nearby chair as she hummed to herself and spoke dreamily about how magical the evening had been, insisting to Billy and Kyle that Jack had clearly felt the same spark she did, and that perhaps fate had brought them together again after all these years, which only made Kyle glare at her with undisguised fury, while Billy shot her a skeptical look and asked whether she had any idea how serious the situation actually was. But Patty only smiled serenely, as though she were floating in her own romantic fantasy, completely oblivious to the storm she had helped create back inside the cabin. Diane's anger slowly shifted into icy resolve as she told Jack that whatever explanation he thought he had would not erase what she had seen with her own eyes, and Jack pleaded with her to listen just long enough for him to explain that something about the night didn't add up, that he suspected he had been manipulated. Yet Diane interrupted him with a bitter laugh and reminded him that Victor Newman had a long history of interfering in Abbott lives, asking whether Jack was now going to claim that Victor somehow forced him into Patty's arms as well, and though Jack admitted he didn't know exactly what had happened, he insisted that Victor's involvement in abducting him to begin with proved that none of this could be trusted. But Diane, exhausted and wounded, turned away from him and said she didn't care who orchestrated it, because the end result was the same. Meanwhile, back at the Abbott mansion, Tracy sat quietly as Nikki finished recounting everything she knew about Victor's scheme, and Tracy's face reflected deep concern as she tried to reconcile the brother she knew with the accusations being thrown around, insisting gently that Jack was not the kind of man who would betray Diane so carelessly. Yet Nikki admitted that Victor had been convinced that putting Jack in a compromising situation would expose his weaknesses, though she clearly struggled with the moral weight of what Victor had done, confessing that even after all these years of marriage, she sometimes found herself shocked by how far he was willing to go to win a battle. At the Newman Ranch, Victor stood by the window staring out over the dark fields while Nick and Adam prepared for their trip to Las Vegas. The tension between father and sons simmering beneath the surface, as Nick made it clear that tracking down Matt Clark was his responsibility and he intended to finish it personally, while Adam insisted that whatever mistakes he had made in the past would not stop him from helping his brother now. And Victor, though outwardly stern, watched them both with a calculating gaze as though weighing every possible outcome of the mission ahead, while Victoria observed the scene with folded arms, defending her father's decision regarding Jack by arguing that desperate times called for bold strategies even if others might judge them harshly. Back at Crimson Lights, Sharon tried to remain optimistic while speaking with Chelsea, encouraging her to believe that Adam had grown stronger and more self-aware than he once was. Yet Chelsea's concern for Adam lingered as she wondered whether returning to a place tied to so many painful memories might reopen wounds he had only recently begun to heal. And when Adam later arrived to say goodbye before leaving town, the moment between them carried a quiet tenderness as Chelsea urged him not to let the ghosts of his past dictate his future, while Adam promised that this time things would be different because he finally understood what truly mattered. Across town again on the yacht, the emotional confrontation reached a breaking point when Diane declared that she needed time away from Jack to think, leaving him standing alone in the cabin as the weight of everything that had happened crashed down upon him, and Jack's mind raced with the terrifying possibility that Victor had engineered the entire situation with chilling precision, manipulating events so that Diane would witness the worst possible moment, while outside Kyle confronted Patty more directly, demanding to know exactly what she had done to his father that night. And though Patty insisted she had only followed her heart, The evasive way she spoke only deepened Kyle's suspicion that something far more calculated had taken place. As the yacht slowly turned toward shore under the darkening sky, each person aboard carried a different storm of emotions: anger, confusion, heartbreak, and determination, and none of them yet realized that the consequences of this single night would ripple far beyond the yacht itself, reaching the Abbott mansion, the Newman ranch, and even the neon lights of Las Vegas, where Nick and Adam were heading into a dangerous confrontation that promised revelations capable of changing everything they believed about loyalty, betrayal, and the lengths powerful families would go to protect their own. Jack remained alone in the dim cabin long after Diane stormed out, the dull throb in his cheek from her slap now mixing with a deeper ache that settled in his chest as the reality of the night slowly took shape in his mind, and he replayed every blurred moment he could remember: the strange drink Patty had insisted he have, the dizziness that had followed, the way his thoughts had felt like they were slipping through his fingers until nothing made sense anymore. And now that the fog had lifted, guilt and fear wrapped around him like a vice, because even if he had been manipulated, the image Diane had witnessed would be impossible to erase. Outside on the deck, the wind coming off the lake had grown colder, whipping across the dark water as Billy leaned against the railing watching the lights of the distant shoreline slowly grow brighter, while Kyle paced nearby like a caged animal, stopping only when Patty appeared again with that same dreamy smile that made Kyle's frustration explode as he demanded to know what kind of game she thought she was playing. But Patty simply tilted her head and spoke softly about destiny and how sometimes the universe brought people together in unexpected ways, which only made Billy shake his head and mutter that destiny usually didn't involve angry wives and family crises. Meanwhile, Diane stood at the opposite end of the yacht staring out at the water, her breathing finally slowing as the initial shock began to give way to something colder and more calculating, because beneath the hurt she felt a familiar instinct stirring, the instinct that had helped her survive countless betrayals and power struggles over the years, and she began to question whether what she had just seen was truly what it appeared to be, especially considering Victor Newman's involvement in abducting Jack in the first place. Yet every time she pictured Jack in that cabin with Patty, the anger surged again, making it difficult to separate logic from emotion. Back at the Abbott mansion, Tracy had just hung up the phone with Billy and was relaying the details of the situation to Nikki, who listened with a troubled expression, because hearing that Diane had caught Jack with Patty made Victor's earlier scheme suddenly feel far more dangerous than she had realized. And Nikki admitted in a quiet voice that Victor often believed the ends justified the means, but this time the consequences might spiral far beyond what he intended, especially if Diane decided to fight back against the Newmans in retaliation. At the Newman ranch, Victor sat in his study with the calm posture of a man who believed he was still firmly in control, yet there was a subtle tension in the way he held his glass as Victoria updated him on the latest developments, explaining that Jack had been found and that Diane had apparently walked in on a scene that would likely destroy their marriage, and Victor responded with a measured nod as though this outcome had always been part of the calculation, though Victoria couldn't help noticing that he seemed more reflective than triumphant. Nick, on the other hand, was furious when he learned the full truth about the yacht scheme, confronting his father with blunt anger as he accused Victor of crossing a line by orchestrating such an elaborate trap. And while Victor defended his actions by claiming he was protecting the Newman legacy from Abbott interference, Nick argued that manipulation and humiliation were not the same as protection, leaving the tension in the room thick enough that Adam eventually stepped in to redirect the conversation toward their impending trip to Las Vegas, reminding everyone that Matt Clark remained a threat that needed to be handled. Later that evening, Chelsea watched Adam pack for the trip with a mixture of pride and anxiety, remembering all the times his past had pulled him into chaos. Yet she could see a different steadiness in him now, and hoped that this mission with Nick might prove he truly had changed, while Adam reassured her that he understood what was at stake and had no intention of letting old demons take control again. Across town, Sharon closed up Crimson Lights for the night after her conversation with Nick, still feeling uneasy about the dangerous path he was about to walk because she knew how determined he could become when protecting his family, and she feared that determination might lead him straight into harm's way. Meanwhile, back on the yacht, the confrontation between Jack and Diane resumed when she finally returned to the cabin. Her expression no longer explosive, but instead controlled and sharp, as she demanded that Jack explain every detail he could remember about the night, and Jack carefully told her about the drink, the dizziness, the strange way his thoughts had blurred together, which made Diane narrow her eyes thoughtfully because the story sounded disturbingly plausible given Patty's unstable history and Victor's known involvement. Yet Diane warned Jack that even if he had been manipulated, the damage had already been done, and rebuilding trust would not be simple. While on the deck, Billy quietly suggested to Kyle that something about Patty's behavior seemed rehearsed, as though she believed the evening had been meant to unfold exactly as it did, and Kyle reluctantly admitted that if Victor had orchestrated this trap, it might explain everything, though the idea that their families had sunk to such manipulative tactics left him deeply unsettled. As the yacht finally approached the dock, the atmosphere among everyone aboard was tense and uncertain, each person realizing that what had begun as a shocking scandal was rapidly evolving into a far larger battle between the Abbotts and the Newmans, a battle fueled by pride, secrets, and old grudges that refused to stay buried. And far away in the glowing night of Las Vegas, Nick and Adam were unknowingly stepping into a situation that would soon collide with the chaos unfolding back in Genoa City, proving that for both families the night's drama was only the beginning of a far more complicated storm. The moment the yacht finally touched the dock, a strange silence settled over everyone, as though the night itself was holding its breath, and Jack stepped off first with a heavy sense of dread weighing on him, because he knew the real fallout was only beginning, while Diane followed several steps behind him with an expression so cold and controlled that Billy immediately recognized it as the calm that usually came before one of her fiercest moves, and Kyle lingered near the gangway, watching Patty carefully as if expecting her to reveal some hidden trick at any second. Yet Patty only gazed around with dreamy satisfaction, as though she had just experienced the most romantic evening of her life, rather than the chaotic disaster everyone else was dealing with. The ride back to Genoa City felt longer than it actually was, each mile thick with tension, as Jack attempted several times to speak to Diane, only to be met with a raised hand, signaling that she wasn't ready to hear another word, and Billy finally broke the suffocating quiet by remarking that if Victor Newman thought this stunt would break the Abbott family apart, then he might be underestimating just how stubborn they could be, though the comment earned him a sharp look from Kyle, who wasn't sure stubbornness alone would fix what had happened tonight. When they eventually reached the Abbott mansion, the lights inside were still glowing warmly against the darkness, and Tracy hurried to the door the moment she heard the car arrive, relief flooding her face when she saw Jack standing there safe, despite the turmoil surrounding him. But that relief quickly turned to concern when she noticed the distance between Jack and Diane and the tension radiating from Kyle and Billy, and after ushering everyone inside, she gently asked what exactly had happened on the yacht, only to receive a tangled explanation that sounded more like a nightmare than reality. Meanwhile, across town at the Newman Ranch, Victor remained awake in his study long after the rest of the house had quieted, staring thoughtfully at the fire as if replaying every step of his plan in his mind, because while he had expected chaos, he had not anticipated the depth of Nikki's anger when she confronted him earlier, and though Victor rarely admitted regret even to himself, there was a faint awareness creeping into his thoughts that perhaps he had underestimated how far the consequences might reach, especially if Diane decided to retaliate with the same ruthless precision she was known for. Nikki, unable to sleep, wandered through the dark halls of the ranch, feeling more conflicted than she wanted to admit, because she loved Victor deeply, yet she couldn't ignore the disturbing reality that he had arranged a situation designed to destroy another marriage, simply to win a personal battle. And the more she thought about Diane discovering Jack with Patty, the more she wondered whether Victor's victory might ultimately cost him something far more valuable than he realized. Far away in Las Vegas, the glowing skyline reflected across the windows of the hotel suite where Nick and Adam had just arrived. Both men tense with anticipation as they reviewed what little information they had about Matt Clark's whereabouts. And although